Welcome to the Decentralized Opportunity Podcast. I'm your host, Tanner Lytle, here with your other host,
Wyatt, Carson. Tanner, let's forego the formalities and dive in and introduce our guest, because our guest is a returning guest and we're very excited to have him back on. So who are we meeting with today, Tanner?
Yeah, so friend of the pod, Charlie Cuddy from Move Venture Capital and the Nebraska Startup Academy, joined us a few months back. It's been a little while.
7 months.
Man, time goes quickly.
I know.
You were just in the early stages of getting your VC firm set up, the Nebraska Startup Academy, and now it's up and running, man. So how things going?
Man, yeah, it's been great. It was, when we were on, it was kind of a vision and early stages. We have had a ton of great momentum on the fundraising side for the fund, which is great. We just finalized our 15th investment of the year, so we are clicking along. We'll do some more social media posts and releases on some of the more recent ones in the end of year write up. But really excited about the early momentum on the Move side of things. And Nebraska Startup Academy has been great too. We launched our online platform a couple of weeks back. We're already over 100 founders that are on the platform, kind of beta testing it out. We've got a wait list where we're kind of bringing on people each week, which is great. But yeah, we've had great response there. I'm really excited. 16 different cities in Nebraska are represented so far, which is kind of even more than I was expecting. But one of the other cool pieces is we just had our sixth different founder from a different state applying for the content in the community and sending messages. Hey, do I have to move to Nebraska to participate in this community? And, tell them, yeah, if you're talking to us with the Department of Economic Development, absolutely, there's space. Come live here. So no, it's been great. A lot of fun momentum, and we're really excited to close out the year and head into 2024 with even more momentum. So
yeah, it seems like almost every time I log into LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook, I see plastered your post of all the new stuff you're investing in, all the new exciting things they have going on. That's so cool too, that you're getting people from all other states, whether they're coming in or just excited about what we're doing. Because from the outside, you wouldn't think there's much happening in Nebraska. And then when you're actually in here, and it's a big theme of what we talk about a lot of these weeks, is there's a lot of really amazing technology. There's a lot of really unique startups and situations that people are solving. And it's not just all cows and corn here in Nebraska.
That's exactly it. And we're so humble in the Midwest that don't take enough time to really share our wins, which I think just kind of builds to the perception. So that's part of what we hope to do with the Academy too, is shine some light on some of the great stuff that's already happening here when people are maybe a little too shy to say how much they've been killing it lately and things like that. So
yeah, it's a Nebraska culture thing, right? Like the person who's probably the most wealthy in the room looks probably dressed in the worst with just overalls and coveralls and doesn't say anything. And then if they're flashy in there, they don't actually know what they're doing. So
now, Charlie, real quick for our listeners, 7 months ago, we had you on and we were talking about the Startup Academy and Move and where you're going with that. But real quick, you mentioned 100 founders on the platform, 16 different Nebraska cities involved, out of the state individuals. That's awesome. Real quick though, for the listeners, can you explain what the goal behind the Startup Academy is again for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Academy really it's an educational, it's a nonprofit that's really focused on educating around founders, building startups, investors who are wanting to get involved. So a lot of the resources that we've seen available have a upfront time commitment of, you have to commit to a certain amount of weeks or months, or you're not really sure what you're signing up for. It's a small sample size that actually get accepted into things like this. But then anything you can find online and start reading about how to start a startup, you read any of the articles, it's based primarily on what it's like to build in Silicon Valley, what it's like to build in New York. And, a lot of the numbers don't make sense. The resources are just different. The pace is a little bit different. And so part of it was just kind of level setting. What is it like to build in Nebraska in the Midwest? How can we, from an investor's perspective, but also from an educator's perspective, like, what are some things that we need to build and be successful here or be on par? So there's a online platform that we launched. You can go to go.any-startupacademy.org and sign up there. So there's a curriculum that we'll continue to build on. We have about 20 modules on there right now. We have around 295 kind of teed up. And what these modules are meant for is just really quick, actionable insights for founders to consume as they need them. So for instance, we just released one on data rooms. So we sat down with Invest Nebraska and it was like, when you guys are going through the diligence process, what are you looking for? What do you need? Talking to, on the move side of things, what do we look for in the diligence process? And just giving it to the founders up front so that they can start organizing something as simple as a G drive and start naming folders. And as they get docs and they incorporate, instead of having them just kind of float in email, like just start putting them in these folders. And then when you do go to fundraise or you need to find them, you're organized in a way and become more credible. So like that's one small way. But we do similar things around pitch deck feedback, business plan feedback, talking along those. But the bigger takeaway from the Academy is getting 100 founders and ultimately more on a common platform. We've had founders already mention that, hey, someone that was out, in Aurora, Nebraska was able to connect with me in Omaha. I hadn't had this conversation. They introduced me to a potential customer and I'm meeting this week. So it's like people in Nebraska cheering for other people and supporting each other in a more frictionless way. But then we do, based on where people are actively participating. The great thing about having a digital community is we can see which pieces of content are being engaged with the most. It's like, oh, go-to-market strategy seems to be really hot. We should bring in an expert and do a webinar or do an in-person event with an industry expert where these people can sit down and we can reach out individually and say, hey, founder XYZ, we've seen you really engaged here. We're going to bring in an expert. Do you want to help tee up some questions, maybe lead a panel and really get the founders involved more that way? One other thing I'll maybe mention quickly, we just started is on Thursday mornings, we do what we're calling startup stand-up. So a way for founders who, as they grow their team, likely will have stand-ups as part of like an agile methodology. But when you're starting out and there's one or two of you, what am I going to get done today? What are my roadblocks? You're just kind of banging your head against a wall. And so giving them a community of others where they can have some accountability, they can have some potential helps to some of these roadblocks and really start building out the muscle memory that they'll need as they scale their startups. So we're starting with one day. We treat the whole thing like an MVP. We'll scale it as the demand increases, maybe have others lead and those types of things. So that's high level education for founders, community for founders. And then in 2024, we'll start pulling in some investor curriculum and help hopefully stimulate the angel investing side of the Midwest as well.
Yeah. First off, I love the stand-up idea. I'm a project manager at heart. So I'm well versed in stand-ups and I love the value in them. So that's awesome to be able to provide small teams, onesie, twosie groups to have ideas to bounce off. That's wonderful. But real quick to level set, this is why, Charlie, we wanted you on here again, reoccurring, because our podcast, Decentralized Opportunity, our goal is to discuss and share exactly what you are doing. Whether you want it or not, you are a fantastic model for our podcast. So thank you for joining us again. I'm glad to see that 7 months ago, the vision is coming to fruition and you're helping build foundational elements and support for people in Nebraska and outside, but really starting in Nebraska to help those people, exactly like our mission with this podcast is to show that everywhere in the world, even in rural Nebraska, Aurora, McCook, Binkelman, there is brilliant people with brilliant ideas, and you're providing the support to make those real. So that's amazing. Well done.
No, I love it. I love what you guys are doing. I be on as often as it makes sense to chat through it and provide resources. And like you hit it right on. Like the whole idea of the Academy isn't to try and tell people in rural Nebraska, like you have to come to Lincoln, you have to come to Omaha to build something. But simply to say, hey, like the math is there's more people here, therefore there's likely more resources here. So how can we help make these available to you so that you don't have to leave? And if you have resources in rural Nebraska that we don't have access to here, like it's a two-way street. Like it's never this is better than the other or anything like that. It's just making sure everyone across the state has the same access to resources, talent, and opportunity.
You described it to me once as it's a common language. so we all know like what to ask for, so you can go through investment and gain access to those same resources. It's almost kind of like a reverse Tower of Babel. So you're actually getting everyone to speak the same, to work together, so we can all grow together, which is really fun. And yeah, I'm really excited for that.
I like it.
So you're big in the startup community, clearly. And recently, and one of the things I was really excited to have you on to discuss is you got to attend the All In Podcast Summit recently. All In, of course, is a extremely popular podcast talking about technology, business, and kind of veers into some other more political subjects. And I'm really excited to hear all about your experience with that and what some of the big topics and themes were to kind of share with our audience, because as you're saying now, it's not just San Francisco, it's not just New York. We're all interconnected now, and things ripple all the way to the heartland even.
Well, that was one of the big takeaways I had from attending that All In Summit out in LA. I think it was back in like September already. It feels like yesterday, but
fast.
It was, yeah, it's fast. Was, of course, like and I'm sure we can share a link or whatever to see who some of the speakers were, and we can talk in more detail, but the level of content was through the roof, like just wild, of back to back to back incredible speakers. But to your point, there's only a couple thousand people in attendance, and getting to chat with and interact with the other, founders, investors, just entrepreneurial minded individuals who found themselves there was really a fascinating piece. And there were people from all over the US, all over the world in attendance. And just, when you kind of break it down to solving problems together, there's seems to be kind of a common language, a common thread that a lot of people can build to. And that part was really interesting. It just felt like it was a very hopeful event of people kind of solving problems and figuring out ways to work together to build a better future.
Now, there's no sense in being coy. The All In Summit, despite only a couple thousand participants, is a big deal. And we absolutely will post a link to the speakers. But for example, some of the speakers were Mr. Beast, Elon Musk, Ray Dalio, and many, many more. The list of speakers goes on. I was digging through it earlier to look at it, and there's no way you could have even seen all those speakers. But the level of talent and intelligence out there to share insights it's huge. It's a big event.
It was awesome. Yeah. And it was, all of it was done on UCLA's campus. So they just had a big auditorium. So they just went back to back to back to back, 30, 45, 60-minute speakers. So everybody got to see all of the presentations. It was unlike any other conference too, where, a lot of times people are standing up to go take a call and do these things. And it was like, 8 to 8:30, grab your breakfast, and you're pretty much like in the auditorium till like 4 p.m. It was nonstop content.
Yeah, and how unique this is because it is done through a podcast with some unique characters. So, are people who put it on that have a very unique perspective on stuff and access to things that a normal podcast or different thing might not. For our listeners, can you kind of explain a little bit like who is the All In Podcast and how you're connected to some of them and how that all works? I know you've done a lot with them in the past.
Yeah. So, essentially it was 4 buddies that have all had various levels of success, from early hire at Facebook to, co-founder early hire at PayPal, Google. Jason's been kind of investor for a while, or really came on the scene investing in one of the first investors in Uber. So they've reached various levels of success in the tech world, multiple like $1 billion companies that were early hires at or founders of. And I had opportunity to work for Jason for a couple of years at launch and built out a program called Founder University for him, which is essentially top of funnel for his accelerator. There's a lot of parallels in what Founder University is and what the Nebraska Startup Academy is or will be at different levels of scale. But yeah, they essentially got together. They played poker, and COVID came, and they took a little break from hanging out, and it sounds like they just kind of decided to sit together on a Zoom one day. We're like, I bet people would be interested in potentially hearing the things we talk about. It really started as kind of a VC back channel of what they were seeing from early stage deal flow. Started picking up more traction in terms of listeners. Started pulling in, presidential candidates and those types of things as their reach grew, and people in DC were kind of listening to some of their insights on tech and how to manage some of the things that they brought on some really influential guests to their podcast. But yeah, it's a weekly podcast that they drop, and because of their success, they have no sponsors. They run the whole thing themselves, so they're able to be kind of talk what they want to talk about and not have to worry about any of that kind of stuff, which I think resonates with their audience.
Yeah, it really gives people access to conversations that they never would have prior, because this would have been the stuff that would be happening at San Francisco in a specific area or specific event, with people that even if you were there, you probably wouldn't have been able to get access to the room to talk to. And now you're hearing publicly their thoughts and what they see and how they're shaping deals, how they value companies, how they're seeing the economy shape up. And it's just been so unbelievably eye-opening to me, the level of thought that goes into their decision making, and then how that must ripple all throughout, the startups community, the venture funding community, all the different things that the ways they look at things is absolutely fascinating. So yeah, I've been hooked every week for, I think they're like on 100 some episodes or something like that now. I think I got in at episode 20 or something like that.
Well, it's the All In Pod is really kind of what triggered me putting in those original days, because I had followed Jason's work with This Week in Startups forever, as I was, in a former life teaching and figuring out how could I get more entrepreneurial mindset into like a math classroom. His podcast was a resource I'd listened to because I just loved hearing directly from early stage CEOs. And that's what he had, he's interviewed on his other podcast for over a decade now. And so he made an announcement on there, like, hey, here's a link to this other thing I'm talking with my friend. You guys should check it out. And so, yeah, I kind of followed along from episode 1 there, and ultimately ended up putting out a tweet about a job opportunity, and I responded to the tweet and got hired. So, just kind of the opportunities, and it kind of goes back to what we're talking about here is, whether it's rural Nebraska or wherever, like the opportunity is a tweet or one, interaction away from having a pretty significant shift in your trajectory for a career or kind of anything.
Yeah, all those gates have really fallen down in many ways. Wyatt and I talk about this a lot. The hardest thing to do now is really just put yourself out there and ask.
Yeah. Yeah. So Tanner and I just celebrated our 1 year on this podcast, and we kind of had an episode to recap. Thank you. To recap, what we've learned. And none of us had a podcast before. We've interviewed a ton of people from all walks of life and all types of businesses. And one thing that I think probably one stereotype that I managed to do away with over the last year of meeting with founders and entrepreneurs is that I always assumed that the startup world was gatekept, to be blunt about it. and my thinking has drastically changed on that. Exactly as Tanner said, what we've learned is that there's more support than ever for people who want to learn how to do this. Is it easy to just log on your computer and build a successful multi-million-dollar business? Absolutely not. But there's a wealth of information out there and people who want to support you and help you, much like you're doing with Move and the Startup Academy and all of these other founders willing to share their knowledge with people. Because entrepreneurship is kind of infective. Everyone wants to start a business. Everyone has a business idea, and they see the success, like the individuals at the All In Summit, and say, what did they do that I can emulate, can kind of, tie back and make a twist for myself and make this successful. And I always assumed it was very gatekept to be successful in the entrepreneurship world. And that is just absolutely not what I found in the last year. Do you agree?
Well, I would 100% agree that the resources are available. And that's part of what we really wanted to be able to provide with the Startup Academy is like more and more people have, entrepreneurship and all of this has been kind of this anyone can do it, in which they can, but it doesn't mean that like it's still really, really freaking hard. And so part of it too is there's so many resources that you could very easily trick yourself into thinking you're being entrepreneurial learning it, but you're just sitting there consuming content and never actually building anything. And so part of what we really wanted to do with the Academy was to kind of remove that excuse of, oh, if I can just read one more blog, then I'll know how to launch my, if I just one more thread on X, and then I'll be able to, build the next prototype. And it's just, kind of giving a North Star of, here's the minimum viable education. Go build something. Like there's so many rabbit holes you could kind of fall down in terms of education. So I think that's one piece too. It's like the resources are there, and now it's just a matter of how can we get them to a point where they're scalable and you can personalize them in a way. And it's actually one of my big takeaways. Larry Summers was one of the presenters at All In, and that was kind of his big thing is like, our universities, our education system really doing the best to prepare kids for this next thing? Like, we can scale and we can personalize everything, but we're not doing it with education. And the key to education is to really make sure that people have the content, whether that's in schools or after you're out of school, wherever you're at. But that was a big piece of what we want to do with the Academy. And I think it's a big piece of kind of where education goes here in the future.
Yeah, we talk about adaptability a lot and being able to pivot. Wyatt's one of his favorite words is iteration, or to iterate.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It seems like, the larger the institution, the more established the institution, whether that be governmental or education systems, they just haven't been able to pivot with the times. And so much more now, there's so much uncertainty. I'm joking with friends talking about like, oh man, am I going to get drafted into World War III because everything's so crazy right now? But in reality, for us, the bar has never been lower to shape, to get opportunity. It's, again, just meeting the right people, getting the right resources to get started. And what I love about, again, this, to tie it back into the All In podcast, is you realize these are just regular people. I mean, they're very intelligent and they work very hard, but they're not some different breed of human that doesn't exist. You could actually have a conversation with them. You can think along the same lines as them, and you can hold your own. You're in that court in reality. And so being able to take some initiative and do some things, you're able to then find some opportunity for yourself.
Totally. I mean, and that was last year. This was the second All In Summit. Last year was in Miami, and I was working for Jason at the time, so we helped put it on and able to work. Just like my role at the first summit in Miami was, essentially working backstage and helping get the speakers ready to roll. And so just exactly that, having 5-minute conversations with these types of presenters, and it was always super personable, and you're having conversations like you would with anybody you kind of bump into at the grocery store or whatever. And that was a big takeaway that first year was these people that are very successful are human, and there are pieces that you can learn from and replicate, or learn from and make sure you never do. Those, I think, is the biggest thing with anything, whether it's a podcast like this or any piece of content, is still being able to openly think for yourself. All of it's data collection. It doesn't mean all of this data is something that you need to immediately implement. And we see that with founders all the time, almost getting whiplash from talking to customers and then immediately implementing it. It's okay, but maybe this isn't even your best customer. Maybe this isn't a customer you want to scale. Did you think through the concept? What are the second and third kind of orders of impact here on these, and being able to do those kind of things. So I think as long as you're thinking of the data collection piece as a single point in your decision-making process, wherever you're getting that data from, is very valuable, whether you're building a startup or trying to teach yourself whatever you're kind of learning.
So bit of a personal question, not really a personal question. So let's talk about speakers during that summit that you particularly enjoyed, key takeaways that you took away from that summit personally.
Man, I think one of the big, I joked with my wife, I was if Gwyneth Paltrow and Elon Musk and Brian Armstrong of Coinbase and Mr. Beast are all on the same kind of talk track, and like they're not necessarily kind of your ones that really stand out. It's a really strong, but yeah, I mean, obviously they all said things, but they all kind of had a similar vision. And the theme of the summit was like today and tomorrow, and it was the idea of like where we are and where are we going. I think the one common theme is that every single one of these people that presented was still like working their butt off to accomplish something. And none of them on the stage would ever have to do anything else, for the rest of their life in terms of like being financially stable. But they're curious, and they want to solve big problems. Like, I think that was kind of if I had to have a theme, that was kind of my overarching theme. And it's, you hear it all the time, like overnight success. Like, I'm sure Mr. Beast, people feel that way. Like, oh, he just posts a video and all it has to do is be like 8 minutes and it'll get millions of views. And this is ridiculous. And it's like, I don't know. He's been like curating his craft and iterating, to your point, since he was like 12 or 13 years old. Like, he's been doing this for like over a decade. Like, it wasn't a overnight success. Like, he opted to pursue those things. It was, kind of Elon's take too, like love him, hate him, whatever. You're like, the guy grinds and like works hard on the projects that he has passion about and doesn't really care what anyone else says. Like, I think those are strong indicators of people being able to make it. Toby talked about the memo that got leaked a while back, kind of trying to cancel him. I'm not sure if you remember this, where he basically told in a memo, like, short version is, we're not a family, like, we're a team. Like, you can't fire your mom, and I will fire you for poor performance. And I thought that was kind of a interesting take, where there is a level of success where tough decisions have to be made. And like, we're in a time, especially in like the startup world, where for the last 18 to 24 months, everything was up and to the right, and everything was growing, and your valuation was based on if you raised a round and not if you accomplished any milestones. And, some really hard decisions are going to be coming, if they haven't already, for a lot of startups. And, startups that appear to be thriving will start to shut down. And part of the kind of piece, it's kind of goes back to the big companies that you're talking about, or the large universities being slow. It's when you're talking like power law distribution of success, it's really hard to be able to go to an education, play like the university and say, hey, this new form of education, like 5 people are going to be really successful and a lot are going to fail. Those failures maybe will learn something, and maybe they'll be successful later, or maybe they'll have a successful career working for one of the successes. Where, our system's kind of set up of, no, if you're here, everyone can win and be successful. And so I think just kind of understanding what success really means in this kind of new education, new entrepreneurial kind of focus system is part of that shift that has to take place.
I've been thinking a lot about the concept of, or the issue around that we're having today, of abdication of responsibility. And it feels like the larger the organization, the more of that happens. And the more that we start doing that in our lives, the more things fall apart. So like you're saying, like, there's so many times just because the tide is strong, you'll be able to be pushed along, but you're not actually doing any of the effort or the swimming yourself. And so when things slow down, you just start to sink. And so I've been thinking about that so much, in my personal life, of just taking agency, moving through. But also what you talked about is with these people, they don't have to work. They choose to work because they're passionate about it. And it's finding that alignment of effort with something that truly is valuable to you and can give you fulfillment, because that's the other piece of it that we see, like you're abdicating your fulfillment to other things. And you maybe take a job that you don't enjoy to earn a paycheck to buy things that you don't really want. Not to quote, Fight Club or any of those tropes, but there's just a change happening now. I truly feel that in the zeitgeist of personal fulfillment, personal improvement, self-improvement, all of these things of really taking responsibility, taking control, and finding alignment with what you want to get an outcome that's usually not inward driven, but outward driven to better other people.
Yeah. Well, one of my quotes that I wrote down from Brad Gershner during it was that the goal is never really the outcome. Like, the goal is the process, and figuring out along the way what it takes to get to these outcomes. Because even when what outcomes you think you have today, like, recent Uber announcement of kind of going after their new like TaskRabbit approach, it's like maybe that was on their radar when they got started, but it's likely something that they found along the way as they found success in other areas, and or maybe it was on the back burner and it was maybe 15 years from now this is something we can consider. But it's if their outcome was to be able to beat like taxis, then they would have never really had a need for Uber Eats, which has become a very successful business. But it was never really about the outcome. Like, you have goals along the way, but the process and perfecting that process is just so valuable.
Yeah, and it's hard to realize you're in that journey. You're in the car trip. Essentially, it's not about where you're going, but trying to get there. And you have to really remind yourself, like, okay, I get, I'm with my family, or I'm with my friends, or we're doing these tasks, and that's the only thing that we have right now because it's the present. Yeah.
I want to forget. Oh, sorry, Charlie. Go ahead.
No, go for it.
Oh, no, I was going to drastically change the subject, so go ahead.
No, the only other piece I was going to add was that sitting around, like, here, they brought on different VCs as well. And Mr. like Koshla, or like times when I was working for Jason, being able to hear like Roelof Botha's like at Sequoia's thoughts on how he kind of envisions looking at something early stage and like seeing the future. It's like really inspiring, because these people in that career, that were kind of in here in terms of like distributing capital to early stage startups, it's a very optimistic view, right? Like, can I see a world that this is meaningful? And, some of the things that stood out at the conference as people were talking about that is like the vision of work, and like how jobs are going to change over the next 10, 20, 50 years. And like a lot of the predictions that were made is like, you'll essentially only work because you want to work. Like, a lot of the jobs that are like considered minimum wage will be able to be replaced. Maybe there's some level of people that are just being taken care of, basic needs, and they can live their life how they want to live. And the people who want to work and pursue passions will have opportunities to do so, which I thought was interesting and kind of in line with what Tanner was talking about. Dr. Polk was really interesting. She's a really great follow on Twitter too, but in the gene therapy space, and just talking about how a lot of the gene editing that she believes will take place within our lifetimes, that, some of the ones are going to involve like recreating some of the rules, like FDA approval for some of the types of things can solve a problem. But she's like, a lot of what I'm looking at is not solving a problem, but essentially how can we, alter humans to have night vision? How can we alter humans to, there's like a gene sequence that allows humans to only need like 3 to 4 hours of sleep and be able to operate totally efficiently, in the same way that someone who doesn't have that sequence needs 8, 9, 10. She's like, is there a world where people would pay to only need to sleep 3 or 4 hours and have zero health consequences? Like, probably. And so like just started going down those kind of rabbit holes of what could the future look like, and to be able to hear things like experts in the space talking about in their lifetime, like they believe these things will happen, is a really optimistic, kind of fun future to think about.
Yeah, I have to think. You were talking about the increase in productivity and people not having to work unless they want to. And I was reading a book recently called BS Jobs, and that was kind of one of the premises around. I think it was in the 20s or maybe even earlier, like 1800s, but something was talking about just the increase in productivity and how we'll only be working maybe 10 hours a week because we'll be 4 times more effective, or all these different things. And in reality, because there's certain systems taking place, and this goes back into why you need to be so guarded of your time and your purpose, because it's amazing how quickly institutions or systems can waste your time. And so even though we're working as effectively like 5 to 10 hours a week, we fill 40 hours a week with meetings and drudgery tasks or useless, tasks that don't actually accomplish anything for the customer or to move things forward, but they're just checking boxes. And that's one of the worlds that, because now we're going into AI, like you said, they have the ability for gene editing potentially and all these different things. We have to be very purposeful and very vigilant on utilizing these more effectively and leveraging them more effectively. Otherwise, they'll just become a part of our lives, but we still don't get any more time in our lives back potentially.
Yeah. Well, in times of one of the things that Toby with Shopify was talking about at the conference was how he makes good use of time. And like, he said he'll go in and just randomly delete recurring meetings that he sees on people's calendars. He's just like, you're having this meeting because the meeting was scheduled. Like, and he said he'll just delete them. He does the same with Slack channels. He said, just randomly delete entire Slack channels that feels off topic, or, maybe even some that aren't like, or that maybe are on topic, but it's just a matter of like, how do we repurpose? Like, if it's meaningful, we'll recapture it. And if it wasn't, then we won't. He was the one that was putting like the cost of meetings on people's calendars based on salary and who was all going to be. Yeah.
Wyatt had that startup idea, by the way, and he got it shot down by, who was it, the VP or president?
So Charlie, can I tell you a quick story?
I love it.
So funny you said that. So I'm a consultant during the day, specifically in the process improvement efficiency sphere. And early in my career, I had a pretty high profile job. I landed it through connections. I was way in over my head. I thought I was a hot shot. And I reported directly to a VP of a Fortune 500 company, a senior VP of a Fortune 500 company. And I was young. I didn't know what I was doing, but I had this protection of this boss who liked me. But anyways, so part of my job was to go through this division and identify improvements. Simple enough. Well, one thing that really always annoyed me, you hit it on the head, is meetings. Because you have 8 to 10 hours of meetings on your calendar, you can call yourself busy and productive. It drove me crazy. So one day I presented a dashboard I created. I spent a couple days playing in Excel and making this beautiful dashboard that had automation in it, and it was great. And I was so proud of it. And essentially what it did is it allowed me to input every participant of a meeting, how long the meeting was, and it would spit out a dollar value. Exactly what you just said. I thought this was just game-changing, groundbreaking stuff right here, and it would open their eyes to how ridiculous this was. Long story short, I got in a lot of trouble. I had the discussion of, for better or worse, this is many years ago, but for better or worse, it was like, know your place and know your audience. That was a hard fought lesson in my career was, maybe I shouldn't tell the senior VP that he's wasting time and money. So that didn't work out well for me. That's funny you said that.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to Toby at Shopify. I would consider a really strong leader, not just a founder, but a leader. So he's looking at the mission, the purpose of the company, driving it forward towards efficiency. And anytime you start to add layers to that, more middle management and all those things, well, their incentives completely change, and that changes the structure of everything. And it goes back to just what we were talking about, abdication of responsibility, because then you get people whose their sole purpose is, well, I run this Slack channel, or I got to have these meetings because that's what I do. And what would I do otherwise? And it adds this weird, perverse, incentive of inefficiency that just boggles down the actual contributors who move the business forward. And that's the one thing I'm truly excited about with all these new revolutions in technology, especially these AI things, that it's going to be so much more effective to let the AI do the drudgery stuff, the research, the going through all the documents, the setting of the meetings, the emailing, the scheduling, and all those things, that it will be those people who only do the meetings or only do those things, you'll have to repurpose them for other stuff. And they won't have control over that because it will just be so obvious that, no, we just let the AI do it.
Yeah. We when I worked for Jason, he had us always read Working Backwards, like the Amazon kind of book model on process. And we do the same type of thing with, it was a written first culture of write out your thoughts, start the meeting by consuming these. Like as soon as somebody started to try and explain their writing, it was over. That was like, it wasn't a well thought out meeting, and it was a waste of people's time. And that if there were other people on the agenda, they would get a chance to present, and the other person could do it, present at the next meeting. And so it was a very much, you never felt like your time was being wasted in a meeting there, because the meeting would literally get shut off,
That's beautiful.
If it wasn't trending in the right direction.
Gosh, it's probably for the best that I don't own my own large company. I think people would just grow sick of me. I could find efficiencies in everything. Exactly. Yeah, that's fair.
I don't think it'll ever be a large company, Wyatt. It might be a very high grossing company, but it'll stay lean and mean and
baby.
Yeah.
That's funny. So Charlie, you when I interrupted you earlier, you actually made a beautiful segue to what I was trying to do. Is the theme of the All In Summit was where we are today and where we're going in the future. And, just looking back once again, 7 months from the last time, 7 months ago, when you were on here, we talked about ChatGPT and AI and this crazy new invention. And this morning I built my own ChatGPT plugin and app. Things are crazy, and I'm not a technical person. I was never a kind of person who would build my own API, but, despite the fact that I want to sleep for 4 hours a night and have night vision, what else were some of the insights of where this is going in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And a lot of it was, there was a lot of conversation on AI. They also brought in, US-China relations experts, under like Obama and Bush, and kind of talked through some of those pieces. But like one of the big themes was just around how people will learn and how people will kind of scale. Like they brought in Jenny Just and talked about like the importance of teaching poker to young girls, and like a total like mindset shift on like, poker is historically been a male dominated sport, but it's more than anything teaches risk and how to manage risk and when to manage risk. Like, so outside of the, the important maybe meetings, like the whole kind of genesis of this podcast that, morphed into this amazing conference was normally the guys would have just been playing poker and no one would have even known the conversations existed. COVID shut that down. So it turned into this conversation, but, it was kind of along those lines of like, there's different ways to educate, and maybe the traditional school system. And like, I don't know, I spent quite a bit of time in the traditional school system, and I think there's pieces that are great. And I think there's pieces that totally could be, revamped to become more efficient. And I just kind of thinking outside the box, and how could teaching poker change the mindset of young girls' opportunity to be entrepreneurs? And things along those lines. They had another professional chess player come in. It was really interesting. She played all four of them at the same time. So it just kind of broke up, the conference into different ways, but kind of shining light on kind of different ways and mindsets of, thinking, learning. Some of these guys that were, one of the other pieces that I really liked was, Chamath, who's one of the guys on there, is traditionally when he sits down and interviews people, very strong in his beliefs and his background, open to information and willing to change. But when he played chess, like very vulnerable and like, hey, this isn't something I practice, wasn't very good, where, some of the other guys were. And it was just kind of to the point, we talked about earlier, like you get good at the things you practice, and it's just kind of find little niches that you can be the expert in is, kind of a interesting path forward in terms of the scale and personalization of the potential future of education.
One of the clips, we started posting shorts, and the one that got probably the most popular was actually around this exact subject, but instead of poker, I was talking about how a 12-year-old learned Magic the Gathering and how much he got from that in terms of standing in front and communicating with adults as a 12-year-old on a peer level through a game, and how all those skills to be able to hold your own, how you're not shy, how you don't feel like they have some authority over you when they don't. All of these different pieces happen from actually a game, or these other like transitionary skills. By doing something, you get something applicable through to your work or through other parts of your life. And one of the things I've been thinking about too is just the importance with everything you said, poker or chess or Magic the Gathering. They're all very much community-based, competition-based, in person. Even if it's done digitally, you're still like you're interacting with a real person. It's not just you and a computer screen. It's not just you consuming something on your own, but you're an active participant working with others and learning in the process. And yeah, it's been pretty, it's amazing again how things that used to be just commonplace, but because of all the changes in technology have now become secondary.
I'll be interested to see, to your point, Wyatt, on the quick transition of AI, like we grew up with technology in a way that our parents and grandparents didn't. And our kids and like that next generation is going to grow up with even more and faster. But like, I feel like we were kind of caught in this in between where my parents can at times be almost scared of technology, where our generation is a little more open to the idea of it. Like, I'm just trying to even think with my own kids, like if my kids were like growing up, I had a bunch of buddies that would love video games. Like the idea that could have ever been a career or an opportunity to make revenue before like Twitch was like not even in the realm of possibility that my parents could wrap their hand around. And so I think like there's something there as we kind of, as a bridge or a transition between some of these generations, that we could potentially be open to the idea of how quickly the tech is changing. And instead of being totally afraid and, self-driving cars are the worst, and, robots at fast food restaurants are going to take these jobs. It's like, I don't know, what if our kids don't have to work minimum wage fast food jobs? What could they be doing, or what problems could they be solving, or music could they be creating? Just open up some of those other doors and avenues that maybe we kind of were told you can't do that because we said so. But I just am curious what that kind of next wave of these these future generations will look like in terms of that education, in terms of the jobs, and kind of what that looks like.
Yeah, there's definitely a change on how people think, for sure. Like you said, our parents didn't grow up with hardly any technology. It's before the internet and all that. We're all, mid to late 30s here. I'm assuming so, the same growing up. And we had that where our childhood didn't have hardly any of that. Maybe some video games, but definitely no real main internet. But until we hit junior high school, we started to adopt that. And then now, I have a 2-year-old, and these kids he instantly knows how to use an iPhone. Like it's ingrained with him. So you're having these new generations literally growing up with technology. And one of the things that I've been thinking about with this AI, you're going to have children growing up from a very, very early age now, or their entire lives, with an AI. And so how is that going to change the way they problem solve, approach the world, consume, learn? All these things is going to be a huge dramatic change in how we've been doing it before. And I think it's really exciting because, like you're saying, there's going to be no brakes put on potentially, where they can just assume, oh yeah, if I want to, why wouldn't I learn that? Or why wouldn't I get access that answer? Because it's at my fingertips, or it's being told to me. It's crazy.
Well, I think part of it too will be the kids that are growing up with it will be able to distinguish it in ways that our parents' generation still can't. I'm people talking about deep fakes and these types of things. I'm not worried about the future generations being able to figure that out. I'm more worried about our parents' generation that are still I just don't imagine my kids growing up and falling for some of the phishing type things that our parents' generation falls for. I just don't really think it's real. And I look back at, just you get used to the technology you kind of evolve with. You look at the movies that our parents and all of the technology that they thought they had. I mean, even something like Star Wars being groundbreaking, technology wise, the kids look at it and are like, what is this? They can clearly tell,
That's
the difference. And yeah. And so I'm not as worried about the future of technology as I think a lot of people are. I think when you grow up with it, you will understand it. Now, obviously, are there positives and negatives, like, of course, like, but I wouldn't have said like we shouldn't have invented the car because somebody might die in a car wreck. Like there's going to be consequences, of course, and we have to be smart about how to use it. But I think there's way more positives of what could come from the technology than any significantly outweigh any of the negatives.
Agreed. Well, Charlie, we're getting to the end of our time here. Thanks for sharing about the All In Summit. But real quick, what's coming up for Charlie? What's the next steps for the Startup Academy move? Are you going into do you do cohorts in the move? Is that not like that similar? Okay.
Nope. So I mean, we'll continue to meet founders and invest. We're right on track. Like I said, we've made our 15th investment. We've got about 3 other ones kind of in the works, teed up. Like we'll potentially flirt with 20 investments here in our first year, which is kind of right on track. We're hoping to do between 60 and 70 deals over the 3.5 years. So right on track with what we're hoping to do. So super excited about that. In terms of the Academy, right now it's all asynchronous based, so founders can consume what they want when they want. I imagine, we flirted with the idea too of, is there a need for cohorts? Do people like cohorts? I think we're kind of letting it play out. I think there'll be some natural kind of groups that form. We're already kind of seeing people interact and they can kind of form groups in that way. But yeah, maybe there's a future where we have some kind of cohort based. If you want guidance, hey, we're going to talk through, idea validation and early product development today. And for the next 2 weeks, like jump on, of course. But yeah, the main focus in 2024 will be a lot more live events based on what the founders on our online platform are asking for, expanding hopefully even more across the state. And I see a path in 2024 where we kind of expand the Nebraska Startup Academy and start opening it up to more people in the region. I think there's too many resources here in Nebraska. I'd love to see Nebraska kind of be put on the map as a innovation center in the Midwest that people want to come and build here. And I think we're seeing a lot of strong signal that could be possible.
Yeah, I love it in a time where if all the conversation is around how funding is drying up and how much harder it is to survive here in Nebraska, it seems like there's actually a lot of things growing. And that's just because how lean, mean, and, underserved. I mean, in so many ways we are. So it's not overly saturated and it's not, I don't know, there's just a lot of good stuff happening and we're very resilient, it feels like too. So yeah, really exciting times.
The resilience, I also think the ability to use the resources the way that we do, and getting a studio to work out of, getting engineering talent, like it's pretty accessible here in the Midwest compared to some of the others. So like as funding dries up, what is maybe three months runway in Silicon Valley, you could maybe get 10 or 12 months runway here. And so like, I think there's opportunities that if we, again, vocalize all of the things that are available, the support systems that are in place and make it an easy decision for founders, I absolutely think that we can attract some of the talent here to the Midwest.
Well, awesome. Yeah, again, super excited. Thanks again, Charlie, for joining us. If you liked what Charlie's doing and you have a good startup idea, look him up, reach out, join the Nebraska Startup Academy, get on that wait list, and yeah, it's going to be awesome. So anyways, we will see everybody next week. Bye.